Thank God it's Monday, vanilla lovers, because that means it's time for some Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and we are back with another lore breakdown. It's been a little while. I apologize to all of you who love these lore episodes. We took a week off, but we are back. Now, if this is your first time joining the show, I say thank you very much for listening. And how we do things here on Countdown to Classic is we hear from you. Yes, you, the players of World of Warcraft, as it's not my opinion that counts, but yours. The first 45 minutes or so of this show will be story time, as I read out a collation of entries that you can find at the amazing Wowpedia and WowWiki websites. However, if you're not much of a lore buff, or you want to read these entries in your own time, then please feel free to skip ahead to the second half of the episode, where we'll go through community reactions to the content from back in the day and get through a bit of fun with regular segments, anger management, memory lane, and tidbits. If you have any comments on what you're about to hear and want your input possibly read out on the show, then email me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com or call into the show on a Friday or Saturday night Eastern Standard Time. And also, please keep those memory lane and anger management submissions coming, people. Please do like, follow, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow the show on Twitter at Counts2Classic with the number 2. Follow me on Twitch at Countdown2Classic, and check out the Patreon page to see how you can enhance your experience with the show. All the links you'll need are in the show notes and are on the website as well. But for now, let's get to the lore with a scoop of vanilla. Blackrock Mountain is a zone located between the Burning Steppes and the Searing Gorge, linking the two regions. This zone is deceptively small and appears empty when first entered. However, it was at one point, without doubt, among the most dangerous places in Azeroth. It is hotly contested between the forces of Ragnaros and his Dark Iron servants on one side, and the Black Dragon Nefarian and his Orc minions on the other. This is one of the most important areas in World of Warcraft lore. No pressure, Josh. It contains 5 high-level instances: Blackrock Depths, Lower Blackrock Spire, Upper Blackrock Spire, Molten Core, and Blackwing Lair. The names Blackrock Mountain and Blackrock Spire predate the coming of the Orcs. Blackrock Spire is the part of Blackrock Mountain that is above ground, and Blackrock Depths is the part underneath the mountain. So where should we begin? Well, let's go with the traditional point of the beginning of the story. For many years following its founding, the dwarf kingdom of Ironforge was led by High King Modimus Anvilmar, the last High King of the United Dwarves, who is depicted to this day by the great statue at the gates of Ironforge. The dwarves thrived in the snow-covered land of Dunmorrow. Now, I know it's supposed to probably be Dunmorrow, technically speaking, but I just feel a lot more comfortable saying Dunmorrow, so apologies to everyone, that's what I'm going to run with. Now, Dunmorrow being a snowy region located between the magma-strewn wasteland of the Searing Gorge to the south, the gentle ridges of Loch Modan to the east, and the swampy wetlands to the north, acting as home to both the gnomes of Gnomeregan and the Ironforge dwarves. Carved into the stone heart of Khaz Modan, the mighty city of Ironforge was a testament to the dwarves' strength and resilience, and is perhaps the most intricate of all the Alliance cities. Over the recent centuries, the dwarves forged partnerships and trade agreements with the human kingdoms to the north that filled Ironforge's coffers and made the kingdom extremely wealthy. Great and expensive wonders, such as the mighty stone-wrought dam, one of the most impressive wonders of the world, attracted visitors from as far away as Kelthalas, a forested area in far northern Lordaeron, who would be awed by the architectural skill and resources involved. However, although prosperous, Ironforge was far from peaceful. Tensions simmered between the city's three powerful clans, the Bronzebeards, the Wildhammers, and the Dark Irons. Though all were dwarves and all inhabited Ironforge together, they were culturally and traditionally diverse and were constantly vying for political power within the kingdom. The largest of the three clans, the Bronzebeards, were led by the willful Thane Mataran Bronzebeard. Mataran was the ruling Thane of the Bronzebeard clan, with Thane being an honorary title amongst both the dwarves and Vicrul. The clan, which formed the bulk of Ironforge's military and mercantile classes, considered itself the backbone of the kingdom and claimed to share distant blood relations with High King Modimus. The Bronzebeards themselves were tough, stubborn, and suspicious of their fellow dwarves, who they considered weaker. The dwarves have always been fast allies with the humans, with the Bronzebeards being no different, and they revel in the prospects of battle and storytelling alike. The nobility of the Ironforge dwarves is born from the Bronzebeard clan. Interestingly, the kings of the High Seat have gone through many scepters during their reigns. By Bronzebeard tradition, the king would let certain top advisors and allies bear the royal scepter for a single day. So it was basically the Azerothian Stanley Cup. And as such, there were rough days for the scepters, which saw the insides of taverns, were dropped off of mountaintops, and were used to smite trogs and so forth. Unlike the other two clans, the Wildhammer clan preferred to inhabit the craggy hills and icy slopes outside of Ironforge, and were led by Kardros Wildhammer, the High Thane of that clan. They subsequently gained notoriety as adept and incredibly resilient mountaineers, for which they were proud. Considered uncouth by the Bronzebeards, the Wildhammers struggled to gain more sway with the High King and to solidify their place among the ruling elite of the city. Sorcerer Thane Thorasan, sometimes described as the Mad Sorcerer, whose past is shrouded in mystery, ruled the Dark Iron clan, who inhabited the deepest and darkest corners of the subterranean city. Their long-standing practice of dabbling in sorcery, along with a penchant for secrecy and political scheming, drew the ire of the majority of Ironforge's other inhabitants. Thorasan, however, held firm control over the kingdom's richest gem and mineral deposits, using this wealth as leverage to protect his people and secure a place in Ironforge's increasingly volatile political arena. Dark Iron dwarves of all subclans speak in a Scottish accent. A member of none of the three clans, High King Modimus attempted to remain neutral in matters of government and always strived to treat each clan with fairness and respect. He was ineffective in attempting to reduce tension between the rival factions, however, and this would ultimately lead to catastrophe. Around 230 years before the first opening of the Dark Portal, one of the two gateway portals that teleport between Azeroth and Draenor, High King Modimus Anvilmar passed away from old age. Before the rightful heir, Modimus's eldest son, could be crowned, the simmering cauldron of rivalry in Ironforge boiled over. Although no one can be sure which clan struck first, the city soon fell into a state of open warfare, which was dubbed the War of the Three Hammers. Each clan mobilized all of their resources and assets in an attempt to seize control of the mountain from the other two. Chaos reigned, and for years the war raged through the mighty halls and dark caverns of the once thriving capital. Eventually, the Bronzebeard clan, using its martial expertise and large size, gained the upper hand and successfully defeated the Wildhammers and Dark Irons. The two beaten clans were driven from Ironforge, and the Bronzebeards claimed total control of the mountain and city. Battered and weary from the war, Cardros Wildhammer and his clan gave up on Ironforge and left for the east. Soon, they settled in the nearby region of marshlands and highlands. There, they created a new city for themselves, Grim Batol, a mountain fortress located in the eastern wetlands. So magnificent and well-built was the city that it soon rivaled even Ironforge in its size and prestige. Although his clan's previous defeat weighed heavily on Cardros' heart, he and his kin came to accept their lot and became content and prospered in their new home. They lost interest in claiming Ironforge and neither made nor planned any attempts to wage hostilities against the Bronzebeards in their newly claimed city. Meanwhile, the Dark Irons, also badly mauled by the war in Ironforge, were forced to leave Dunmoreau and decided to venture south to the tranquil and idyllic Red Ridge Mountains. Located south of Burning Steps and east of Elwyn Forest, the Red Ridge Mountains are a region of rushing rivers, towering elms and rising elevations. The mountains are under storm winds protection and remain one of the last peaceful regions in Azeroth. There, in a similar fashion to the Wildhammers, they forged their own independent kingdom and constructed their own nation. Dubbed the Kingdom of Thaurissan after their leader, they also found a great degree of prosperity in their new home. Unlike Cardros, however, Sorcerer Thane Thaurissan was far from content to simply accept his clan's failure to take Ironforge. Wallowing in humiliation and with his pride permanently damaged, Thaurissan carefully plotted the Dark Iron's eventual reconquest of the Old Kingdom. As well as revenge on the Bronzebeards, Thaurissan also sought retribution on the Wildhammers, who, although being driven from the capital as well, still fought ferociously against the Dark Iron clan during the war. After years of scheming, the Sorcerer Thane was finally ready to act. In the recent lull since arriving in Red Ridge, he had begun building up large forces. Among the many Dark Iron warriors and battle mages, the clan's armies also included legions of the powerful and effective war golems, as well as devastating siege machines. With this new and diverse army, Thaurissan was confident he could at least exact retribution on their dwarven cousins. The clan's plan of attack included a two-pronged invasion of both the Bronzebeard and Wildhammer territories simultaneously. The Sorcerer Thane plans to lead one army to Ironforge himself and personally defeat the Bronzebeards, reclaiming the city with the help of his wife, the Sorcerer Modgood. Modgood embraced her clan's long history of studying arcane magic. As the wife of Sorcerer Thane Thaurissan, she had first pick of the Dark Iron clan's most powerful enchanted artifacts. Yet she was never quite satisfied with the offerings on hand. Modgood would often dispatch her servants to find new relics that she could study and use as instruments in the creation of spells. One of these dwarves returned with a blade that thrummed with dark energy. Modgood was immediately taken by it. For days she retreated into her archives to unravel the dagger's mysteries. At times, she could be seen talking to the weapon. When she later emerged, Modgood called for the dwarf who had brought the blade in order to thank him. No one could find him. No one could even remember his name or his face. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Modgood and the Sorcerer Thane also had a son as a result of their union, Dagran Thaurissan, whose story will be told when we eventually touch on the lore of Blackrock Depths. Further to his plans to reclaim Ironforge on one front, a second army led by Modgood was to invade the Wildhammers nation at the same time and seize their equally important capital of Grim Batol. As planned, Thoresen and his army marched deep into the Bronzebeard kingdom and eventually reached Ironforge itself. Using his vast siege engines and constructs, the sorcerer Thane struck deep into the city, forcing back the beleaguered Bronzebeard defenders. As in times past, battles raged across Ironforge's inner halls. Despite the Dark Iron's large forces, the Bronzebeards put up a stubborn and powerful defense. Only after Thoresen had reached the very heart of the city itself was he halted. Having finally rallied his forces, Thane Madaran Bronzebeard began to push the Dark Iron clan from the city once again. As events unfolded in Ironforge, Modgud had successfully led her army to the Wildhammer capital and laid siege to it. The Wildhammers were surprised by this sudden assault, but desperately held their ground against the invaders. Dark Iron mages and sorcerers used their dark magics to batter and break the Wildhammer's will. Led by Modgud, they brought the shadows of Grimbatol to life, transforming the bustling city into a realm of nightmare and shadow. The darkness itself began to stalk the dwarves in their own stronghold, and soon began to take a major toll on the Wildhammer's strength. Desperate, Kardros Wildhammer led some of his best soldiers in a swift and brutal counterattack, which just succeeded in slaying Modgud herself. With her death and a renewed Wildhammer resistance, the Dark Iron army fled south. Coordinating with the Wildhammer, Madaran learned of this recent development and brought his forces north. The Dark Irons were caught between the Bronzebeards and the Wildhammers. They were attacked from both sides and utterly annihilated. In the Dark Irons, Madaran and Kardros and their clans had found a common enemy and a new purpose. They promptly put aside their old rivalries and marched their mighty hosts southward, pledging that they would not rest until they had purged Thoresen and his treacherous Dark Irons from the world. Soon, their armies began to converge on Dark Iron territory, with no Dark Iron army large enough to oppose it. As the Bronzebeard and Wildhammer armies closed in, Thoresen desperately scrambled for a way to salvage the situation. He ultimately decided to draw on the fiery powers from deep within the world and use them as a powerful weapon. Thus, Thoresen, along with his 7 most trusted comrades and fellow patriarchs of the Dark Iron clan, simply known as the Seven, wove a great spell to save his kingdom. Yet, amid the conjuration, his mind turned to the death of his wife and his recent defeats. Anger broiled through Thoresen's heart. His rage grew so absolute that his spell work breached the elemental plane and tapped into a powerful being, Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. Now, slight detour. Who the heck is Ragnaros? Well, in the beginning, the world that would become known as Azeroth was ruled by the Elementals, ageless and unchanging elemental spirits who had attained raw physical form. A nascent titan, a colossal, planet-sized cosmic being, maturing within the world's core, had consumed much of the 5th element, spirit, and without this primordial force to create balance, the elements were thrown into chaos. The 4 elemental lords, Neptulon, the Tidehunter, the water elemental, Therazane, the Stone Mother, earth, Al-Akir, the Wind Lord, wind, and Ragnaros, the Fire Lord, a towering manifestation of flame and carnage, each ruled over innumerable lesser spirits, constantly clashing with one another on the surface of the primordial world. Ragnaros the Fire Lord employed brute force to destroy his enemies, and longed for nothing more than to boil the seas and choke the skies with ember and ash. And wherever he went, volcanoes erupted, spewing forth rivers of fire. The other 3 elemental lords came to foster a deep hatred for the Fire Lord, for his devastating and brazen assaults. When the entities known as the Old Gods, parasitic eldritch horrors who are physical manifestations of the void, arrived from the Great Dark, the physical universe that contains planets, and established their empire, the elemental lords saw the invaders as a threat to their dominion. For the first time in Azeroth's history, the native spirits of the world worked together against a common enemy. Ragnaros' fiery servants joined with Al-Akir the Windlord's tempests, creating blistering firestorms and cyclones of flame that reduced the old god's citadels to ash. Eventually, however, the elementals of the world could not stand against the endless swarms of Naraki and Akir, monstrous races that arose from the organic matter that seeped from the old gods' blighted forms, and all of the lords were enslaved. When the Titan forged, the armies crafted by the Titans from Azeroth's crust to fight the Old Gods, arrived on Azeroth to battle the Black Empire, the Old Gods sent their enslaved elemental lord lieutenants to face them. Ragnaros battled for weeks against Tyr, the mightiest of the Titanic Watchers, and Odin, an equally fearsome Titan Keeper, yet the Keeper's metallic forms kept them safe from the Fire Lord's flames. Eventually, the two keepers managed to push Ragnaros back into his volcanic lair in the east and defeated him. The Fire Lord and his minions were thereafter banished to a smouldering corner of the elemental plane, a prison plane constructed by the keepers, known as the Firelands. It was then that at the core of this world, the brothers turned on each other. For 5 millennia, a battle was fought. It was during the elemental sundering that Ragnaros attacked Thunderan, the prince of the air elementals. The conflict was initiated by the Fire Lord, who sought to expand his power. Thunderan was utterly defeated, and the Fire Lord feasted upon his essence, but was unable to consume him entirely. Ragnaros divided what remained between his servants, Baron Geddon and Gar, a fire and a lava elemental respectively. In the center of a vast sky of fire in the elemental plane stands Sulfuron Keep, the home of Ragnaros. It was there that Ragnaros ruled his burning land with a molten iron fist. That was until an unwitting Thaurissan ripped Ragnaros from this elemental plane and summoned him to the surface of Azeroth. The earth began to buckle and wrench apart as the Fire Lord's violent arrival sparked a series of apocalyptic explosions that instantly killed the Sorcerer Thane, the Seven, and many Dark Iron Dwarves, as well as shattering the surrounding mountains. Thaurissan and Modgood's son, Dagran, survived the apocalyptic explosion. From far away, whilst marching on the Dark Iron Dwarves, Mataran and Kardros watched in horror as the world was torn asunder and firestorms engulfed the area. Ragnaros' rebirth scorched and destroyed much of the Red Ridge Mountains, a raging volcano which eventually came to be known as Blackrock Mountain, now towered over the ruined Dark Iron Kingdom. The smouldering wasteland south of the volcano became known as the Burning Steppes, while the yawning chasm to the north was dubbed the Searing Gorge. It was clear in that instant that Thaurissan had doomed his people. Fearing for their own safety, the Wildhammers and Bronzebeards turned around and retreated back to their lands in the north. Horrified at what devilry Thaurissan had brought upon the land, the combined armies of the dwarves ceased their march. The War of the Three Hammers had at last reached its conclusion. Weakened from his summoning, Ragnaros retreated deep inside his new lair within the blistering heart of the mountain. From this sanctum, known as the Molten Core, he went about enslaving the remaining Dark Iron Dwarves. Ruined and having little choice, the dwarves obeyed their new elemental master's every order, burrowing many intricate tunnels throughout the mountain in his service. Within their fiery new home, the Dark Irons would nurture a permanent hatred for their cousins, who they would never forgive for the wrongs they committed against their clan and people. Inside of Blackrock Mountain, there was an area that protruded above ground that came to be known as Blackrock Spire, with the parts underneath the mountain being named Blackrock Depths. So what was the fallout for the other dwarves following all of this? In the years following the War of the Three Hammers, Mataran and the Bronzebeards rebuilt the damage inflicted on Ironforge during the war. The Wildhammers, however, found that Grim Batol would forever remain uninhabitable. Upon her death, Modgud had cursed the city, permanently transforming it into a place of darkness and terror. Although the Bronzebeards offered the Wildhammers a place in Ironforge, it was little more than a conciliatory gesture. Mataran knew in his heart that Kardros would be too proud to ever accept such an offer. Once again, Kardros and the Wildhammer clan set out to create a new home for themselves and forge a new future for their people. While some Wildhammer dwarves settled in the land of Northeron, not far from Grim Batol, Kardros and the majority of Wildhammers ventured farther north until they reached the wooded region of the Hinterlands. With the terrible memories of Grim Batol still fresh in their minds, the dwarves decided to forego the usual underground dwellings of the past and instead constructed a majestic open-air city, Airy Peak. In their young city high in the mountains, the Wildhammer honed their ties to the natural world that they had possessed and treasured since their days in Ironforge. They befriended the intelligent half-lion, half-eagle griffins, which called the nooks and crannies of the mountains home. Over time, the Wildhammer clan as a whole would develop an inseparable bond with these creatures, even learning to tame and ride them. These two species would become emblematic of each other, and their bonds would persist even through some of the darkest wars in history. Renowned for their close bond with griffins, they treat these animals as equals in battle instead of pets, leading to numerous successes in the Second and Third Wars. Members of the clan also came to be known as airy dwarves, and also the derogatory term of butterflies soon popped up for the Wildhammer clan. Mataran and Kardros, the leaders of the victorious clans, established diplomatic ties between the two healing nations. The great arches of the bridge known as the Thandol Span were constructed, both as a means to ease trade and travel between the two nations, as well as a symbol of their unity and friendship. Although rivalries and ideological differences would persist, the two leaders vowed that their clans would never take up arms against each other again. When Kardros and Mataran eventually passed away, their two sons commissioned masons to forge two great statues of the leaders. The craftsmen constructed these at the entrance to the Southlands, beyond which lay the decimated territories of the Dark Iron clan. There, the statues would maintain a tireless vigil, their stony eyes ever watching over the broken domain of their nemesis. These two monuments survive to the modern day and can be found in the Valley of Kings in the region of Lochmadan. The War of the Three Hammers was one of the most significant events in shaping the future of the Dwarven race. The war spread the Dwarven clans out considerably, and each clan would go on to play its own role in the future of the Eastern Kingdoms and Azeroth itself. As a token of reconciliation prior to his death, Mataran Bronzebeard offered the then deposed prince of the Anvilmar family and his descendants a permanent seat on Ironforge's Senate. Now, a lot of other stuff happened with the dwarves, but we'll save that for another episode when we specifically take on Dwarven history. But turning back to the newly created Blackrock Mountain, what happened there after it emerged onto the landscape? Well, while Ragnaros and the Dark Iron dwarves toiled away inside for hundreds of years, with the dwarves tunneling away and eventually building a large impressive city of their own inside of the mountain, elsewhere, the first war broke out between orcs and humans when the orcs eventually passed through the Dark Portal into Azeroth. During the events of this first war, Gul'dan, the first Orcish warlock as well as the founder of the Orcish Horde, led this horde through Azeroth, attempting to claim the land as his own. Through this war effort, Gul'dan sought whatever power he could get his hands on with which to tighten his control of the Horde and Azeroth. One such power source was that of the elementals. The following is a lengthy excerpt from the first World of Warcraft Chronicle book, the third of which came out recently and will be a prize to a lucky upper-tier patron of the show next week. Check out Countdown to Classics Patreon page for more information on how you can get involved in the show's monthly prize draws. But here we go with this excerpt. It reads: Gul'dan recalled how he had empowered the Horde before its conquest of Karabor. He had broken the world's elements and infused their energies into the orcs. Azeroth teemed with elemental spirits, and they were much stronger than those on Draenor. Shadow Council spies reported sensing massive elemental activity to the northwest of Red Ridge, near a smouldering volcano called Blackrock Mountain. Cho'Gall confirmed those reports, but he kept some information to himself. Not only did the two-headed ogre sense elemental power in the mountain, but he had also discovered that the local spirits were in league with the old gods. The Shadow Council secretly travelled to Blackrock Mountain, planning to subjugate its inhabitants. It was a disaster. No orc had ever dealt with this level of raw elemental might on Draenor. The first few Shadow Council warlocks who tried dominating the elements faced a grim fate. They were burned from the inside out by gouts of flame. Deep beneath Blackrock Mountain lived Ragnaros, the elemental lord of fire. He commanded innumerable lesser elementals, as well as an entire nation of mortal slaves. For centuries, the Dark Iron Dwarves had served as Ragnaros's loyal subjects. Whenever a warlock tried to trespass too deep into the mountain, the Dark Irons would attack, their forces bolstered by raging fire elementals. Before the Shadow Council incited Ragnaros and his minions to all-out war, Cho'Gall mediated peace. His fledgling connection to the old gods allowed him access to the mountain's depths, and after extensive conversations with the Dark Iron Dwarves and Ragnaros's elemental lieutenants, an accord was reached. The old gods were delighted with the work the Horde was doing, and they wanted to help. But they had no intention of giving even a scrap of power to Burning Legion puppets like the orcs. After all, Sargeras and his army stood in direct opposition to the powers of the Void. Yet they did grant the Shadow Council a small refuge, called Blackrock Spire, high in the mountain. If the warlocks remained there, they would not be disturbed by Ragnaros or his followers. Gul'dan was disappointed that his quest to seize the mountain's power had failed, but he was pleased that Cho'Gall had proved to be such an effective diplomat. Had he known about the Ogre Mage's true motives and his newfound reverence for the old gods, he might not have been so glad. Yet for now, a secret haven was something the Shadow Council desperately needed. Tensions between Blackhand and Gul'dan were rising. A refuge was a priceless thing. The mountain's power could wait until later. After achieving victory in the First War, and 4 years after the initial invasion, War Chief Doomhammer had no means, nor the inclination, to pursue Stormwind's refugees. The Horde had taken heavy losses to achieve victory, and he knew he needed to secure his conquered land before facing any new enemies. He sent messages back to Draenor to call up the remaining clans, the War Songs, the Shattered Hand, the Laughing Skull, the Thunderlords, and the Bone Chewers would need time to reach the Horde's new territory. Orgrim used that time to consolidate his control of the Horde. His first priority was eradicating the Shadow Council. Though it was a powerful force, it was the root of the Horde's corruption. Orgrim believed that the Shadow Council was in league with dark forces that were manipulating the orcs, and that the warlocks' obsession with fell magic was what had killed Draenor. On a more personal level, Orgrim also wanted revenge. Members of the Shadow Council had murdered Durotan, Draka, and their infant child, or at least as far as Orgrim was aware. The Shadow Council's whereabouts were unknown. Luckily, there was someone to interrogate. Gul'dan was still unconscious, but the Horde had captured his puppet, Garona, as she tried to escape from Stormwind City. Orgrim had her tortured until she revealed where the Shadow Council had built its secret refuge, Blackrock Spire. A large force of Horde soldiers stormed the smouldering volcano. No fire elementals or dark iron dwarves barred their way. Ragnaros and the old gods kept their presence hidden, eager to see how the violent situation would play out. The Shadow Council warlocks could do little to save themselves. Their fell power could only delay Orgrim's wrath for so long, and they fell before the war chief's loyal followers. One of the few council members to survive was Cho'Gall. The ogre made a very convincing case for why he should be spared. Without Cho'Gall, the Twilight's hammer would succumb to madness again. Could Orgrim really afford to lose such a capable fighting force? Cho'Gall swore his allegiance to the war chief, claiming that he had been manipulated into Gul'dan's service. Orgrim accepted his surrender reluctantly. He wasn't sure whether the two-headed ogre was telling the truth, and he didn't particularly care. He needed fighting power to protect the Horde's new lands. Cho'Gall also proved his usefulness when he introduced Orgrim to the Dark Iron Dwarves, who lived deep within the mountain. The rapport between the ogre and these creatures was an unexpected advantage. The dwarves agreed, at Ragnaros' secret command, to allow the Hordes to claim Blackrock Spire as its new headquarters. The old gods were delighted to see what chaos the orcs would sow on Azeroth in the coming years. So that's that for that pretty long Warcraft Chronicle excerpt and the information about what happened during the first war at Blackrock Mountain. But what happened after that? Well, as we heard, the area became the headquarters of the Horde for the Second War. The Alliance rallied during the Second War and slowly took back the lands the Horde had taken from them in the First War. Eventually, led by Sir Anduin Lothar, the Alliance forces found themselves at the foot of Blackrock Mountain, eager to end the Horde's stranglehold on Azeroth. What ensued was the Siege of Blackrock Spire, also called the Assault on Blackrock Spire or the Battle of Blackrock Spire, one of the bloodiest and most decisive battles of the Second War between the varied races of the Alliance of Lordaeron and the Orcish Horde, surrounding the location of Blackrock Mountain in the Burning Steppes. Occurring around 7 years after the original opening of the Dark Portal, the battle saw the two factions clash for ultimate mastery of the Eastern Kingdoms, and served as one of the closing conflicts of the war. For over a year, the Alliance and Horde had fought a brutal war across the length of the continent. However, with the Horde's strategic defeat during the siege of Lordaeron's capital city, the tide began to finally turn in favour of one side. War Chief Orgrim Doomhammer subsequently retreated with his forces to the south, gathering at the landmark of Blackrock Mountain to stage a final stand. Anduin Lothar had commanded the Alliance armies since the coalition's inception, and had battled with the Horde across the length and breadth of the continent. Sensing that victory was within sight, Lothar ruthlessly pursued the retreating orcs, liberating the dwarf and gnome nations in Khazmodan along the way. Bolstered by these new races, who quickly joined the Alliance, Lothar's army continued its advance. After seeing that Lordaeron was cleaned of all Horde forces, Uther the Lightbringer and his men joined up with Lothar and the main Alliance army. Doomhammer too recognized that the war's conclusion was imminent and that a final battle would soon decide the fate of his Horde and his people. With this in mind, the war chief ordered a halt to the retreat and began gathering his forces and fortifying his position at one of the Horde's most stalwart bastions on Azeroth, Blackrock Mountain. The Horde now needed any reinforcements it could draw upon, and Doomhammer dispatched messengers back to the world of Draenor to call upon the overly bloodthirsty Orc clans left behind during the initial invasion of Azeroth. Additionally, orders were also sent to Chieftain Zulahed of the Dragonmaw clan in Grim Batol to gather any remaining red dragons they could, including their matriarch Alexstrasza, and bring them to Blackrock Spire. Finally, messages were also sent to the Blacktooth Grin clan, at the time still returning by sea from defeating Gul'dan at the tomb of Sargeras. They were informed of the Horde's new rendezvous point and told to make haste there in anticipation for the upcoming battle. Despite a delaying action carried out by the Bleeding Hollow clan, the Alliance march south continued at a staggering pace, greatly aided by the actions of the Knights of the Silver Hand. Before long, and far too soon for Doomhammer's liking, the army under Anduin Lothar arrived at the outskirts of the Burning Steppes. No other choice remained now but to prepare for the deciding engagement of the Second War. War Chief Doomhammer watched as the vast Alliance army, thousands strong, began to wind its way into the Burning Steppes region, edging ever closer to the Horde's position. The Orc commander did not engage the enemy immediately. The Horde was outnumbered, but not by a large margin, and the necessary reinforcements had failed to materialize. Attacked on the sea voyage home, the Blacktooth Grin clan would not arrive in time, and neither would the Bleeding Hollow clan, nor any forces from Draenor itself. The Dragon Maw too had not yet arrived from Grimbatol with their desperately needed dragons. Anduin Lothar wasted no time and quickly arranged his units around the enemy stronghold built into Blackrock Mountain, effectively beginning a siege. Though the spire was protected by formidable gates, the Alliance immediately set to work with their siege weapons, hammering the defences relentlessly. Though Doomhammer was deeply troubled by the course of the war, he refused to despair at this time of crisis. Instead, he resigned himself to fighting his enemies with all the energy he could muster, even if doing so meant a certain but honourable death. The war chief now rallied his people within the confines of Blackrock Spire. He reminded them of the Horde's power, the many victories it had accomplished, and the desperate nature of the battle ahead. He challenged each of them to show their devotion to the cause by throwing themselves on the Alliance armies before them. As Lothar's forces were still preparing for a siege, the gates of Blackrock Mountain suddenly burst open and the Horde garrison spilled out. Though he knew he could not defeat the Alliance through sheer force, Doomhammer adopted a new plan that he believed could yet secure victory. Having observed much of human culture throughout the war chief was convinced that if he could slay the Alliance's commander, the rest would lose heart and crumble. Thus, he directed the charge to cut a path straight to Anduin Lothar, and personally led the attack at the head of his elite guard composed of ogres. Lothar's troops, though numbering significantly more than their adversaries, were taken wholly unaware by the sudden and unexpected assault. They had largely been preparing to wait out the Horde, and the Orcs now overran their forward siege lines amidst the initial chaos. Before long, Doomhammer's charge had reached Anduin Lothar's position, though the veteran commander accepted the challenge rather than flee. Lothar and Doomhammer, supreme allied commander and war chief, now engaged in deadly close quarters combat, even while the battle for Blackrock Mountain raged around them. As their duel progressed, a kind of hush fell over the area, and each side began to watch, transfixed, as their leaders clashed again and again with sword and hammer. Both warriors were closely matched, and the outcome of the fight remained uncertain for a time. Eventually, however, Orgrim Doomhammer's sheer strength, prime youth, and ferocity gained him the upper hand. With one swing, the war chief shattered Lothar's great sword, driving the human commander to his knees. And with a final blow, he brought his weapon down on Lothar's skull, killing him instantly. Doomhammer was quick to proclaim his victory to those looking on. Having witnessed the outcome of the titanic struggle, the Horde warriors became inspired and cheered this great victory. They pressed their assault, pushing ruthlessly against the now demoralized Alliance ranks. With their revered commander slain before their eyes, many of the Alliance's troops began to despair and lost the will to fight. Resistance to the Orcs' onslaught was at serious risk of collapsing before the paladin Turalian chose to take action. Turalian had acted as Lothar's lieutenant since the beginning of the Second War, and, like many, had looked to the Knight Commander for guidance and inspiration. Seeing his friend and mentor slain before his eyes did not, however, have the ruinous effect that Doomhammer intended. Steeling himself with his values as a paladin of the Knights of the Silver Hand, and understanding that giving into sorrow would neither bring Lothar back nor avenge his death, Turalian instead turned his attention on the situation around him. Taking charge of the Alliance forces, Turelian unleashed all the holy powers at his disposal. Light radiated from his person, blinding those around him, including Orgrim Doomhammer, and forcing the battle to a standstill. Without hesitation, he picked up Lothar's shattered sword from where it had fallen and declared to Doomhammer that he would pay for his crimes against this world and the people of it. In response, Doomhammer swung up his hammer, but Turelian disarmed him with the broken sword's blade. Surprised and recognizing his end, Doomhammer lowered his head to accept death. Turelian, however, chose instead to strike the orc with the flat of the blade, knocking him to his knees before collapsing unconscious next to Lothar. He then called on his allies around him to pull themselves together in this dark hour, as Lothar both would have done himself and expected of each and every one of them. He reminded them of why the Alliance had been created, why they were there in the first place. They needed to stop the Horde, to prevent it from doing any more harm to their loved ones and their world. For the Alliance and for Lothar, Turelian called on all those gathered to fight with him for final victory. Finally, Turelian addressed Doomhammer and his soldiers, condemning them for their actions and promising them a swift death, save for the war chief himself, who would stand trial in the capital city he had so desperately desired to seize. With their hope and faith restored, the soldiers of the Alliance produced one great battle cry before crashing into the stunned Horde lines. Turelian himself led the charge and struck his first blow, his fellow paladins alongside him. The Orcish armies swiftly buckled under the renewed onslaught, their organization and discipline largely disintegrating. Some fled north, east, and west to escape the carnage, while a great many others rushed in the direction of the Dark Portal, seeking to escape back to Draenor. The most dedicated continued fighting just outside the Spire, though the battle was lost. Under Turelian's orders, the Alliance troops overwhelmed these holdouts, disarming but not annihilating them. Instead, they were bound in chains alongside their fallen war chief, now prisoners of the great conflict. The siege of Blackrock Spire would ultimately be the second last major battle of the war, with the final one taking place around the Dark Portal not long after. Sometime after the end of the Second War, a statue was constructed to commemorate Anduin Lothar's sacrifice during the battle at Blackrock Mountain. With its sword pointing directly to the spire itself, the statue was ironically constructed using the labour of orc prisoners from the war. The statue still stands on the very spot the commander fell in the burning steps to this present day. After the Old Horde had been defeated at the Dark Portal following their defeat at the siege, many orcs were caught and put into internment camps by the Alliance of Lordaeron. Rend Blackhand, the bloodthirsty son of the former war chief of the Horde, Blackhand the Destroyer, along with his brother, Maim Blackhand, who served as dual chieftains of the defeated Blacktoothgrin clan and Blackrock clan, apparently rescued some of their warriors from the internment camps and went back to Blackrock Spire, where they founded the Dark Horde. The Dark Horde was made up of a renegade group of Blackrock and Blacktoothgrin orcs, trolls, ogres, and goblins who would dwell in Blackrock Spire and consist largely of the remnants of the Blackrock clan and Dragonmaw clan. 2 years after the Dark Portal was reopened by the Horde of Draenor, the Black Worm Nefarian arrived and set up shop within the cozy confines of the mountain. He made his home in the upper reaches of Blackrock Mountain and made the Dark Horde his personal army, in addition to the other black dragons he brought and the experiments he later created. So, who was Nefarian? Nefarian was the eldest son of Deathwing and his prime consort Cyntharia, Deathwing being one of the 5 dragon aspects and leader of the Black Dragonflight. The Black Dragonflight is one of the most prominent reoccurring threats to the mortal races of Azeroth. Like his father and his sister, Onyxia, Nefarian had a human guise, appearing as Victor Nefarious, the apparent human lord of Blackrock. Holding the Blackrock clan and various clans of ogres under his control, Nefarian ruled from his lair at the top of Blackrock Spire. Nefarian began experimenting with the blood of all of the various dragonflights to create a chromatic dragonflight of unstoppable warriors. In this task, he has succeeded his father, and aided by his sister, he plans to use them to rally the black dragonflight to his command. With his grand designs for the keep, Nefarian and his draconic minions took control of the upper spire and made war on the dwarves' holdings in the mountain's volcanic depths. Realizing that the dwarves were led by Ragnaros, Nefarian vowed to crush his enemies and claim the whole of Blackrock Mountain for himself. The dragon has carved out a swathe of the spire and set the generals of his increasingly large army, including Rend Blackhand, the war chief of the Dark Horde, to defend the peak while he continued his sinister experiments. The spawn of Nefarian continues to creep from Blackrock Spire. With the two powerful entities taking residence within Blackrock, Ragnaros and Nefarian waged a brutal war for supremacy and control of the mountain. Ragnaros controlled his dark iron dwarves and their various machines and golems, as well as an army of elementals, beasts, and powerful lieutenants such as Baron Geddon, Gar, and Sulfuron. As an elemental lord, he also gained the favor of the Twilight's Hammer, a widespread nihilistic cult active across Azeroth that fanatically serves and worships the old gods and seeks to bring about the end of the world. Nefarian controls the Dark Horde, as well as his dragon lieutenants and his invention, the chromatic dragonflight. Nefarian himself could be found in Blackwing Lair, overlooking the mountain, while Ragnaros led his army from the mountain's volcanic core. The two rivals both hoped to raise a powerful army that could take over Azeroth. And that's Blackrock Mountain as it stands at the outset of the events of vanilla World of Warcraft. Whew, we made it. And now, with all that done, it's time to hear the community's reactions to the zone with That's What We Said. Each lore episode, we revisit some old forum posts that highlight the community's reactions to the content that we've just discussed. So, what did we all think of Blackrock Mountain from back in the day? Well, we'll start with the following posts, and firstly we have user Argranak at the WoW official forums who says this. I never ran this place when it was live, but from running it solo now just to explore and experience it since, I think Blackrock Mountain has the best endgame dungeon instances Blizzard has ever made. And it's all on the design of the place. It all just felt so big and epic. It felt like Mount Doom and the Mines of Moria had a beautifully hellish yet awesome baby. Hellish mountains in the fantasy genre are always awesome. Mount Doom for Tolkien, Death Mountain for Zelda, and this. Any other hellish fire mountains in fantasy I don't know about? Oh yeah, the Red Mountain in Elder Scrolls Morrowind. Next we move on to Firebat, again at the official forums, who says this. Blackrock Mountain is my favorite place in all of World of Warcraft. Everything from the huge stone gates with the two massive heads to the incredible hollow interior with massive chains holding a boulder in place and the statues of dwarven kings of old holding those chains. Damn, oh my god, it just feels like the ultimate classic Dungeons and Dragons atmosphere with orcs, ogres, trolls, crazy dwarves, elementals, fire salamanders and molten giants. Then you had all the coal-coloured metallic and stone walls decorating the natural walls of the volcano. Oh, it's just so perfect. And next we have this post from Cross88 over at Wowhead. This place really makes playing this game worth it. The amazing scale of this vast underground city, from its detailed architecture to its labyrinthine corridors, makes it easy to get lost trying to explore it all. And then this one from Superfluke over at the official forums again. I clearly remember going up the steep path and into the cavern for the first time. I started at launch and didn't know a lot about the Warcraft lore, and everything was new in this huge world. I was a rogue and cautiously stealthed my way into the mountain and then saw this dragon soaring high above. Whoa! I didn't know at the time it was just for flavor, and I slowly crept along the wall, holding my breath and hoping to survive, fingers ready to vanish or sprint if my cloak was penetrated. I didn't relax until I finally came to the other entrance and went down into the burning steps. And all of these posts bring up the first thing that we notice about Blackrock Mountain when we get there. The aesthetics of the zone. These users are quite right, and I actually think that that's the best description I've ever heard of the area. It's as though Mount Doom and the Mines of Moria mated. The grim, dark, expansive caverns, lit up by the radiance of the molten lava coursing through it, was terrifying beauty at every turn. Do you recall the first time that you headed along the path into the mountain? You might have seen the fire spitting forth from the sides, or noticed the fine dwarven architecture as you passed through to the inside. It really did have a Lord of the Rings feel to it, and felt like something deeply rooted in high fantasy, which I know is one of the main reasons that I love WoW so much. I wanted to feel like I was playing in a huge world where magic happens, and the design that Blizzard put into Blackrock Mountain absolutely helped achieve that. The tone of the area was helped by the amazing soundtrack, not just for the zone itself, but for the instances contained within it as well. I was watching Countdown Council member Tsunami stream the other day and caught her running BRD, and had not listened to that track in quite a while, and I absolutely loved it. The epic scale flows through in that grim music, and I couldn't have been having a better time hearing that again. I can't wait to get back there when Classic releases. However, not everyone agreed that Blackrock Mountain was the bee's knees, as we hear from user Tay Siri again at the official forums, who says this: Ugh, that place. The worst visual design in all of vanilla. Hey guys, I have an idea. Let's design a zone with absolutely no contrast, slather it in oranges and browns, not bother lighting it, and then make about 8 dungeons worth of content there so everybody can get sick of it. Next we have this post from user Siladin, who says this: It's not my favorite zone. I was on a dead server and finding groups could take even longer than the run itself. Corpse runs were brutal. People that didn't know the way back would leave. Molten Core was ugly, but the instances did have a neat look to them. Finally, we have this post from user Casper the Stoner over at the Elysium forums, who says this: Is wasting hours of your time corpse running to Blackrock Mountain fun to you? So with those posts, maybe all was not well within the state of Blackrock Mountain after all. Was it perhaps a bit drab and boring for you? True, the colour scheme wasn't that amazing. I mean, sure, if you like lava orange and rock brown, then this is the place for you. But some people like a bit of life in their environmental designs. Plus, if you didn't like the look of the place, well, guess what? There's not much of a reprieve for you because you're going to be spending a shitload of endgame time here. Get used to more and more brown walls and all the rocks you can handle. Just cleared that dungeon and keen to get out of here for something a bit more vibrant? Think again, because now you're heading upstairs to the next Dwarven Mountain dungeon. As the second post highlights, if you were unfortunate enough to be on a low population or a dead server, so to speak, then this place probably just represented lost hope to you, striving to get there but not being able to find the pals to head there with perhaps decent raiding guilds being few and far between where you were. Also, as both the second and third post point out, corpse runs were particularly brutal in this zone. Perhaps not Stranglethorn Vale brutal, but still not overly pleasant. And if you were wiping a lot in raids and dungeons, then you might have had some pretty warped memories of this zone before you got good, quote unquote. Or perhaps you never did get good and it still burns. Now, I understand the negativity behind those posts. However, obviously, as we do here, we bring you both sides of the coin on Countdown to Classic. Personally, if you're wondering, I liked Blackrock Mountain, so I sided with the first few posts that I read out. But we move on now to the next point, and we go to user CP Taylor 38 over at MMO Champion, who says this in a thread titled So... Blackrock Mountain... And they say this: should we not just go ahead and have a bunch of goblins mine a big pit beneath it and lay down some dynamite? Just level the whole mountain. I mean, how many problems have we had in it over the years? We've got evil dwarves, evil orcs, evil cultists, evil dragons, Ragnaros, more evil orcs, and just about everything else in this one mountain. Why don't we just go ahead and level it so it won't be the go-to lair for seemingly every villain ever? And this post directly comments on the lore that we just heard. So lore-wise, was it all a bit much? Was it odd to have Blizzard constantly turn to Blackrock Mountain as a magnet for badness in Azeroth? Weren't there other empty cavernous areas strewn throughout the land for beings with evil intentions to set up base camp? For instance, Nefarian and Ragnaros basically being co-tenants on the lease. What gives? Surely those two powerhouse personalities could have easily been separated geographically. It would have been like giving Sauron a roommate at Mount Doom, like if Saruman moved in for a change of scenery. Personally, I don't have a huge issue with it though, but I see where the complaint is coming from. In such a huge world, it does seem a little funny to put two high-end bosses there, particularly with the ramifications that the decision had on high-level world PvP, which we'll hear about very, very soon. But in saying that, it was kind of cool to have one central location where a lot of action happened. Shit went down at Blackrock Mountain, and it was awesome. Lore-wise, everything we just heard about worked for me, and I don't think Blizzard went to the well too many times. But perhaps one more time would have been pushing it, which I actually believe they did in later expansions. There's also the quick note that I didn't mention through the lore about Blackrock Spire being the site of the ley line pattern of striking. Many ley lines of power exist across Azeroth, and the rune pattern derived from this particular ley line increases the martial prowess of the casters. So that could be another reason that beings have been drawn to the area. But it's not mentioned much in the lore that I found, so take that as you will. If it helps satisfy any other reason for everyone and their dog settling down at Blackrock Mountain, then so be it. But moving on, we have this post from user DJ Vortex over at Wowhead, who says this: during the Molten Core and Blackwing Lair days on PvP servers, this was one of the best locations in Azeroth for world PvP. Full 40-man raids versus each other was a sight to be seen. On any given raid night, you could see hundreds of skeletons leading to the instance portals. Then we have this from user Fascinated MMO Champion. I did more PvP than anything in vanilla being a rogue. I took no enjoyment from ganking lobbies, but world PvP at Blackrock Mountain was a ton of fun against equally geared opponents. Then this from user Apocalypse at the official forums. More importantly, Blackrock Mountain in general was this massive haven of world PvP. Solo PvP, giant guild v guild PvP, summoning your own guildies off the edge of Blackrock Mountain for being late to the raid PvP. Some really great memories there. And finally on this PvP note, we finish with this note from Wowpedia that says the following. Before the Burning Crusade expansion was released, Blackrock Mountain was a PvP hotspot, even more intense before Ahn'Qiraj, due to the fact that Upper Blackrock Spire, Lower Blackrock Spire, Blackrock Depths, Molten Core, and Blackwing Lair were all in Blackrock Mountain. Since these were the most popular instances, many players of both factions would clash here on their route to the instance. Many PvP videos feature extended segments of Blackrock Mountain PvP, or what was known as BRM PvP. If one was going to Blackrock Mountain, one could expect to encounter resistance on the way there. However, with the release of expansions, BRM PvP died, to say the least. A more complete explanation of Blackrock Mountain comes from a well-known video by Paxton titled The Death of PvP, which says the following in relation to Blackrock Mountain. Some called this the Gauntlet. Everyone from 50-somethings to the fully geared raider frequented this war zone cleverly disguised as a mountain. Some in hopes of acquiring powerful epic items, others to ensure that didn't happen. There were more dangers lurking around every corner in this mountain than to possibly list. Even the most experienced raider couldn't anticipate rogues hidden in these corridors, or the priest hiding in the shadows, helplessly tossing mind-controlled opponents into the fiery lava pits below. As with most pre-TBC content, the objectives and rewards found in this mountain have been trivialized to the extent that there is no motivation for players to come here. Blackrock Mountain may only be remembered for what it was, the destination for endgame PvE and high-stakes PvP. And to this point, Blackrock Mountain, the war zone. There truly is many a video online of Blackrock Mountain looking like a terrifying and yet amazing place to be due to the large-scale PvP mayhem that took place there. 5 instances took groups of varying capabilities and gear amongst both factions to this relatively smallish zone. What would be lurking around the corner? You may have heard in my interviews with Dustin and Funk Nasty previously on the show, they alluded to this world PvP that we're now hearing about, and they pointed me out to videos of them absolutely taking on all comers at Blackrock Mountain, hiding behind walls and unleashing hell on unsuspecting opposing faction guilds who thought they were enjoying a stress-free run into a raid. It looks glorious as fire and ice rain down AoE destruction in tight spaces and people flee for their lives. Also, a common theme was a lot of priests having some very fond memories of a bit of mind control fun, sending people off of platforms to a magma-filled death. Was that perhaps you? Did you participate in a lot of world PvP at Blackrock Mountain? Do you think the ever-present threat of PvP at an obvious high-end PvE location hurt the design of the place? Or, if anything, made it that much better? Write to the show if you have any particularly fond PvP memories from Blackrock Mountain at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. We move on now to the next post from user Nefarian, who says this. Blackrock Mountain will always be the ultimate WoW experience for me. First 40-man raid, first big boy dungeon, first raid versus raid PvP, fighting from the entrance of the mountain all the way down to the Molten Core entrance. Next, this post from Frenzy over at Wowhead. While I personally enjoyed the events here in Vanilla World of Warcraft days much more than the additions in Cataclysm, I don't speak for everyone, and I just want to be grateful for all of the unique hours provided in this one little area, where there is barely a good guy in sight, the lore was rich, the fights meaningful, and the multiple game reasons to keep coming back and enjoying these huge zones and their sprawling content. And as mentioned before, sometimes it was just good old-fashioned fun battling the opposing faction in the mountain while waiting for your party to show up, escalating into guild-wide conflicts and other great shenanigans. Many of the dungeons we see now are streamlined to get through it easily and quickly, but zones like Blackrock Depths and Blackrock Spire attempted to show you that there are whole worlds out there to explore and get lost in, entire tribes and kingdoms hostile to you and each other, and there are unique reasons people need to go into dungeons besides loot. Some need attunements, others need to farm items only found in them, and others still had to use the Black Forge and Black Anvil, or the tank had to go see the Thorium Brotherhood merchant for some patterns. It was really something special in its heyday. Next we have this post from user Marcius, who says this. Blackrock Mountain was the pinnacle of vanilla. You spent the upper 40s in Badlands and Searing Gorge, then burning steps 50s to 60, grinding quests and gearing up while the mountain loomed in the background. You fought other players around each of the meeting stones, and every time you entered there was a huge fight. Eventually you enter the lower dungeons and then progress up the mountain or venture beneath it to Molten Core to the raids. 3 raids raids, UBRS, MC and BWL, and multiple dungeons, Blackrock Depths and LBRS really made the mountain feel huge in scale, far larger than any other dungeon hub in World of Warcraft. And that final point raised by these posts is this. Blackrock Mountain, for all intents and purposes, was epic. At least at the start of the vanilla days, and for a large portion of them, it was a looming landmark that represented the end game. The big bads lived there en masse because for a while there it was the big bad final zone, the finishing line, so to speak, that the players were racing towards. That was until January 3, 2006 and the release of patch 1.9 and Encourage. But think of it this way. Vanilla World of Warcraft lasted about 25 and a half months. For just over 14 of those 25 and a half months, Blackrock Mountain housed what was considered the end game PvE-wise of World of Warcraft. Out of the box, from November 23rd, 2004, Molten Core and Ragnaros was as far as a raider could go. Eventually, patch 1.6 brought us Nefarian and Tier 2 on July 12th, 2005. This location was the house of the final boss of the game for about 55% of classic WoW's life cycle, and that's why it is a location that is near and dear to many people's hearts. It was something to aspire to, and something that many people spent countless hours working hard to get to, or doing once they got there. I understand that PvE or raiding isn't necessarily everyone's cup of tea, but it's still pretty damn popular, and so this was an important location, lore-wise, gameplay-wise, and content-wise. It made us realize we were very small pieces in a grander scheme of events. It's here where players got that first 40-man dungeon crawl experience, with obviously Onyxia being something a little bit different, obviously, so not quite counting that, and that you needed 39 other relatively skilled and geared people to rely on to get through a high-end long dungeon crawl. As we heard, though, it was a key location for PvPers as well, so there kind of was something for everyone here. PvP mayhem was ever present as guilds hung around the mountain waiting on their PvE content, or simply heading there to mess with others. Our Mount Doom really was kind of Mount Cool, and I can't wait to bust my ass to get back there again in Classic. But with all that done, now it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic brings you some of the angriest posts that I've dug up through the week about the content that we've just discussed. So what were people angry about in regards to Blackrock Mountain? Well, we start with this post from user Erit over at the official WoW forums, who says this: people would do Blackrock Mountain once and never do it again. Even in vanilla, I went there. Twice. Next, we have this post from user Norcal, again at the official forums, who says this: I wish there were a quest chain to attach rockets to Blackrock Mountain and blast the whole thing into the sun. Next, we have this post from user Mokaso, who says this: WoW was epic back then. Those instances and Blackrock Mountain set the standard for all of the WoW expansions, which in my opinion have nothing on vanilla. Vanilla was, well, you'll see when you play Classic. And that's it for anger management, because most of you actually said pretty nice things about Blackrock Mountain on the whole. But with all that done, now it's time for Tidbits. Each lore episode, I come to you with a few little-known tidbits of information about the content that we've just discussed. So a few quick things about Blackrock Mountain you may have not known, or you may absolutely have known it this whole time. Now, firstly, the interior of Blackrock Mountain was a no-mount area, and players were forced to traverse the zone on foot. That was eventually changed in patch 3.3.3. Next, there was originally no difference between Blackrock Mountain and Blackrock Spire as zones. Next, rather than being occupied by the Black Dragonflight, Blackrock Spire was described in Warcraft 2 Beyond the Dark Portal as being the roost of once enslaved dragons that turned evil after the Second War. And finally, Blackrock Mountain features as an attraction in the Blizzard World in-universe map in Overwatch, but is not seen in the in-game map itself. And with that done, now it's time for Memory Lane. Each week on Countdown to Classic, I recount some of the listeners' more memorable or funnier stories from back in the day with Vanilla World of Warcraft. And given that I skipped the forums last week, they've stacked up a bit on me again, and so this will be one of 2 Memory Lane segments this week. And we start with Discord member Valda, who says this: "This is the moment that forever cemented my place as a main tank in both my mind and my guild. When Molten Core was the highest tier of raids available, my guild was slowly working their way through at a decent pace. We would wipe occasionally, but for the most part we powered through encounters. As the guild's youngest member, at I think 14 at the time, I was generally considered a tank in training by the main tank, and hardly really looked at by raid leaders. During our fight with Golemag the Incinerator, I was relegated to tanking one of his 2 pet corehounds. Due to negligence/inattention by our main tank or his assigned healers, the main tank suddenly died, and Golemag started to rampage through the squishies. I heard our raid leader sigh and vent and say, 'Just wipe it, you guys, let's reset.' But the healers kept on healing. The DPS kept on attacking. Like hell, I was just going to lay back and die. A few chaotic moments and 10 dead squishies later, I'm now tanking the Corehound and Golemag together. Healers began to concentrate on me, and I was, at any given moment, 1 foot in the graveyard from all the damage I was taking. But we persevered. Golemag fell at my feet, and many were saved from that long, well-trodden graveyard run. It was then that the raid leader said, 'Well, I think it's fair to say Valda saved us there.' It was a quick throwaway line that they probably thought nothing of, but to my impressionable young self, it meant the world. I now and forever will take the role to protect others first." Next we have this submission from Discord member Father Ping. "I have a guild drama/memory lane story for you. Sorry for the length. When our guild shrunk, we still wanted to raid Molten Core, so we had to co-op with 2 other guilds to get enough people to run it. We ran on Saturday mornings and we had 20 people. The other guild had 12 and the other had about 8. We'd made some decent progress the first few weeks. We'd gotten up to Gar the week before. Well, this week was very special because we had an epic bind-on equip Blade of Hannah drop off the second Molten Giant. This item had plus 11 to strength, agility, intellect, spirit and stamina. The co-op together classified it as a pally weapon after much discussion. I wanted it for the agility on my hunter, since it would have been an upgrade. Well, there were approximately 6 paladins in the raid, 2 were from our guild. The raid leader called for all the paladins to roll. Well, one of our pallies won the item. In Ventrilo, she said she didn't know for sure if she wanted it or would even use it because she played Holy. Well, the other Retribution Paladin from our guild said he'd buy it from her for 100 gold after the raid. This was sort of shady, but wouldn't have been such a big deal if both the other guilds weren't in the same vent channel with us. That Saturday morning, our Molten Core running guild co-op dissolved. And next we have this from Wilson Ma, a Countdown Council member. I recall when we were raiding AQ40 and we were taking a quick rebuff break. They had those in-game snowballs you could throw at people. Well, people in the raid kept throwing them at each other. One of our locks got fed up with it and said, "If I get hit with one more snowball, I'm pulling the boss." As any sensible guild would, a few members thought he was joking and then threw more snowballs at him, including me. It turns out he wasn't joking. He just started running straight forward and pulled all the mobs and the boss. When some of the leaders came back and asked what happened and who the fuck pulled, he just said that his monitor fell on his keyboard. Before I raided with the guild, this supposedly did actually happen, so he was sarcastic and said that's what happened again. They later found out the truth and just laughed. Next we have this submission from Discord member Nostalgia Dad, who says this. So back in vanilla, a few friends and I would use water walking to go out to the edge of the water, then take a water breathing potion, swim to the bottom, and invite gold spammers into the party and summon them via warlock portals to the bottom of the ocean, right at the fatigue edge, and then let them die. We would also summon, in the Burning Crusade, people who weren't level 70 onto the edge of a spike in Blade's Edge Mountain and leave them there. And I say thank you to everyone for those wonderful memory lane submissions. And please, if you've got some of your own, send them into the show. And as you can hear, they will get read out. If I've forgotten anyone, don't distress. There are more coming throughout the week. But if by the end of the week you haven't heard yours, please do write to me and let me know and say, hey, Josh, I wrote to you and you didn't read it out yet. And I will get to it. I promise. I'm pretty sure I've gotten to all of them. So we're okay so far. But that's pretty much the episode for today, everyone. But please do hang around 2 more minutes for some important news. After I just very quickly thank the Countdown Council members, Borzen, Palfura, Seven Winters, Tsunami, Velarco, and Wilson Ma, once again for their ongoing support of the show. Thank you so much. But with that, I just want to shift gears slightly here, everyone. While memories are the theme that we just finished off with, I just want to quickly take the time to bring up some other very sad news that hit the community this week. As many of you heard by now, gaming personality, critic, and commentator Total Biscuit, otherwise known as John Bain, lost his battle with cancer just a few days ago on May 25th. If you're not aware, Total Biscuit's involvement with World of Warcraft through his time running WoW Radio from 2005 to 2010 made him a large presence in the lives of many World of Warcraft gamers. Personally, I actually didn't know of Total Biscuit and his work until about a month after I started Countdown to Classic. A few Discord members pointed out Total Biscuit's work to me and were kind enough to provide links to archives on YouTube of episodes from the original days of WoW Radio. I had to listen to a few episodes and could see immediately why people developed such a connection to him and his efforts with regard to not only World of Warcraft, but gaming in general over the years. So I just felt it was appropriate to pass on my sincerest condolences to John's wife, Jenna, and his stepson, Orion. In reading more about John since the news broke, it's become quite clear to me that the gaming industry tragically lost a wonderful voice way too soon. And I've no doubt that the memory of Total Biscuit will live on within the gaming community at large for many years to come. Whilst that is a somber note to sign off on, if you are looking for a pick-me-up, then I would suggest immediately jumping onto YouTube and searching for the old Blue Please radio shows and enjoying some time with them and see how the real pros tackle World of Warcraft in media. Enjoy, everyone, and with that, I'll see you all again on Wednesday.